Our reading today is Romans 8:12 through 25. So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if, in fact, we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay, and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience.
Thank you, Jamie. May God bless the reading of the Word this morning. Amen. It's on today. Some of y'all figured out what I was up to when you saw my little drawing. Some of you haven't been here in a couple of weeks, so you might need to know a little bit more about it. Let's see, where can I set this? Yeah, he's saying, yeah. Who wants to hold it? That's the question. Who would hold this for me? If you haven't been here, they're afraid I'm going to try to shoot an arrow at this. We've been talking about sin and the power of sin and death, and so we went back and interpreted the word from the gospel, hamartia, that the Apostle Paul uses for sin, and it means what? To miss the mark, yeah. And so the analogy was an archer's term, so I've been threatening to bring a bow and arrow up here to see. We've also been talking about faith. The word for faith is pisteuo, and it means what? Oh, gosh. I'm putting this up. We're not ready. We're not ready. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. For God so loved the world that she gave her only begotten Son. Thought I'd shake you up a little bit. No, come on. Faith, pisteuo, means trust. Does anybody remember that? Trust or risk. So who has faith enough in me with a bow and arrow to hit the mark? And how many of you think I'm going to miss the mark? Yeah, you have no faith at all. I'll shoot toward the table, and you explain that to Jesus in case I miss and do something wrong at the table. So, to miss the mark, sin, hamartia, to miss the mark. Probably the safer analogy was the morning I ironed my pants and I missed the crease, and you could all see that I had missed the mark. I was sinful in my ironing, so to speak. And then to trust, to risk. To believe, pisteuo, believe, faith, trust. Okay. You're probably not. I was going to ask a question, but I'm looking out over here and I'm seeing a bunch of honest faces, so you wouldn't really be able to identify with this. I was going to ask, have you ever told a lie that just led to another lie, and you got caught up in it? And yeah, I'm looking at y'all and you're shaking your heads no, and I believe every one of you. Believe you. Well, Alan, I know different because I went to high school with Alan, and so, matter of fact, I won't say anything else if you won't. We'll leave it at that. So one time, right after high school, I found myself in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, with some friends of mine that I played in a band with. And most of us lived here in Texas, and we were very far away from home. And you know, there's this preacher rule: when you get a preacher 50 miles away from home, he doesn't act the same anymore. And it's true of everybody. It's just a fun way to make fun of preachers. So I was more than 50 miles away from home. So were my friends, and we got a motel room in Gatlinburg for the night. And lo and behold, there were a couple of church buses parked in the parking lot. When you're 18 years old, nothing is more fun than a couple of church buses parked in the parking lot, because there were a lot of girls at the hotel. And so we started running into guests in different common places around the motel, and here it started. Who are y'all? Well, we're a band, which wasn't really a lie. It was a stretch of the truth, but, you know, not a real good band, but we were a band. Well, where are you from? Well, we're from Texas. And the first thing I could think of, there was a band that used to play the Upstairs Club called Texas. And I never saw them, but I thought, it's the coolest name for a band, and if they ever break up, I'm stealing the name. So I didn't wait. There I was in Gatlinburg, and they weren't there, so the girls said, what's the name of your band? And I said, Texas. They said, great. We said, yeah, we're on our way to Washington, D.C. That was a lie. Where we're going to hook up with a band called Montrose, which I thought would impress them. Turns out 16-year-old girls didn't know who Montrose was, but I knew. I thought it was impressive. We're going to hook up with Montrose. We're going to go on a tour. They had a really smart youth leader who started asking questions, you know, because he knew we were lying. And so I liked it when he got around to say, well, how much money does your manager say you're going to make? And I said $10,000, and somebody else said $5,000 all at one time. And it's like, well, somewhere between five. It's real unclear right now. So, you know what? The really wise youth leader was kind to us, too. He kept a good eye on us. Nothing went wrong for the night, but he didn't out us. He didn't tell anybody that he knew we were lying. And so as far as the young girls knew, man, they had spent an evening in the presence of rock stars, as far as they knew. And we had a grand evening. It gets hard, though, if you keep going to try to support the lie, you know, especially if you're not well prepared like we weren't. So you probably don't ever do anything like that. You probably don't have anything in your life that is sort of a falsification or not the entire truth that you prop up. Unless, like me, you're a 3 on the Enneagram, and then most of your life is telling people what you want them to hear. But that's true of anybody, isn't it? So I wanted to talk about that today. You can rest for a little bit. This is not a target. Well, it is for your life, but not for me with a bow and arrow. I'm not going to shoot at this, and I'm not going to ask you to trust me or risk anything today in that respect. But you may indeed be led to risk something before this is over. So, here we go. This little red dot right here is your life. That's you right there. It would make sense if I could draw this big timeline of the universe, and you know, you've seen that before. This is where you are, and your life makes this much impression in time. But just imagine this little red dot is your life. So if that's it, what is out here think about it this way. Your whole life and your whole psyche and everything is like a little universe. You've got all these things in orbit out here. So let's talk about what that is. If this is your life, let's talk about how you perceive yourself. Is anybody here really tall? Come on. Who grew up tall? You did, Wyatt. Yeah, see? So you're either tall, no short people jokes. You're tall, you're short, or you're average, right? I mean, don't you kind of fit somewhere in there? If people describe you, do they say, well, he or she's tall, or he or she is short, or they're average build, average height, average build? Some of us think that we may be too thin, or in America, some of us probably think that we are a little too heavy, and many of us in our culture maybe 10 to 20 pounds over, and so, but we get caught up in this. This is a tough one, especially for young girls. You know, am I too big? Do I look thin enough? So we get caught up in that. How about, where are you on the socioeconomic scale? Are you rich? Most of you might say no. Are you poor? I hope and would suspect that in here most of us would say no, we're not poor. So we may be, again, somewhere in the average, the middle class. As some might say, the disappearing middle class in America. That's Another sermon for a political Sunday, not today. How about this one? Do you go to church? Do you go to church somewhere? Most of you go to church here. Some of you are here visiting, and you may go somewhere else on a regular basis. And if not, we'd love to see you here. But you may not be religious. You may be agnostic, which is simply another way of saying, I'm just really not interested. Without saying I'm just an atheist and don't believe at all, but some are not interested. There's not as much involvement, not as much interest in the local congregation as there used to be. We know that for sure. What else do I have here? Oh, yeah. How about smart? Anybody in here smart? You know what? There you go, Shannon. Thank you. Shannon is smart. The truth is that all of you in here are among some of the smartest people in the world in terms of how much you have in here, what's been put in, your education, how you've been taught to process and use it, how you've had opportunities and experiences to do that. Many of you are smart. Some of you may not even know that. Some of you may realize, or may think you realize that you're not smart, that you're slow, and that may not be true. Maybe you're comparing yourself to other people, and you're not measuring up there, but that's not always wise. Okay? How about safe? I didn't know how to say that. Safe, conservative, or foolish. You know? Would you dare give yourself... You'll probably tell me somebody you know that's foolish if I ask you, but would you give yourself that moniker? You know, the famous last words of a redneck, right? Here, hold my beer and watch this. I'm going to do something real foolish next. Here's a good one. Some of you are handsome or pretty. Some of you spent a whole lot of time this morning trying to make that point, and some of you didn't. And some of us just don't feel all that handsome and pretty. We feel like we're plain. Maybe not ugly, but just plain. There are other ways of defining yourself. If I asked you the first one, you probably would say something about what you do for a living, right? So we would have to say that occupation goes on here. So if I said, tell me who you are, tell me what you do. You might say, I'm retired military, or I'm a youth minister, or I'm a CPA, or a bookkeeper, or an accountant, or I'm a musician. You might talk about what it is you do for a living or for a hobby, or where you've invested your passion and where you've invested your life. Okay? Now, have I left anything out? Does anybody want to add anything to this, how you see yourself or identify yourself? It could be something you're troubled with. It could be something that you're happy about, something you're proud of. Anything? Say again? Married. Oh, good one. Yeah, some of us are married, and some of us are single. Ooh, some of us are the big D, divorced. Yeah. Huh? Some people are lonely. Lonely. Yeah. There we are. Here's another obvious one, male and female. And I'm fixing to take you somewhere very... I didn't want to put that one first because, you know, there's not a lot you do at the end of the day about it. You're male or you're female. But the Apostle Paul says weird things like, you know, in the grace of God there is no male and no female. No Greek, no Jew, no free, no slave. So, with that in mind, this is what Richard Rohr calls circumference issues. Okay? This is a good lesson. Circumference issues. Look at this like these are things that are rotating around your life, like they're in orbit, okay? You know, like the planets. And you know, when you talk about the solar system and orbit, and you get to thinking, wow, if something tilts just a little bit, or something out of orbit strikes something, man, you know that it's caused chaos in the past, and something like that could throw, I mean, some things could happen and we're gone. I mean, we're just in a moment. If it gets too hot or the air goes away, we're gone. I mean, just like the dinosaurs, however that happened. And so you are working from the center of your life. You're trying to work right here to keep all of this in orbit. Do you realize that? You're working really hard on trying to make sure that you're safe. Or you're making big statements with how foolish you can be from day to day and moment to moment. Or you're caught up in, I'm very wealthy or I am not wealthy at all. And, I've preached before and I say it that, man, that thing about money, that gets people, it doesn't just get people who have a lot of it. I know people who have no money who are enslaved to the same boss because they live their whole life saying, oh, if I were a rich man. You can be caught up in whether your build is right. You're too tall, too thin, too short, too heavy. And it colors the way you go into your day. Okay? But here is the thing about circumference issues. They are not you. You are the one who is balancing all of this. You get it? You're the one who's trying to keep all that in orbit. You're the one who's caught lying day by day by day. Now, relax. Circumference issues are not untruths. Some of us are tall. Some of us are poor. Some of us, not many. Some of us, we are male, we are female. There's no matter of lying or truth about it. The thing is that we get to thinking that these are so true that they're the only truth available. They are the only game going. You can hear someone say, oh, if I had only, and then insert. Like I could say, if I'd only gone to college right out of high school when I had a chance. But I didn't. I went out and did something else. But you can't look back and do that. If only I had is another way of saying I'm not who I really ought to be today. And that's not true. We've just got to get your focus off of these circumference issues. No one is asking you to stop being. No one's asking you to not change. We're just saying these are not the only game there. These circumference issues are what Thomas Merton and Richard Rohr call the false self. Okay? And again, it's not because they're a lie, it's because they're not the only truth, and they want us to believe they're the only truth. This is what Paul called sarx, or the flesh, right here. This is it. And this is what one of the enemies of Christianity, and that's sarcasm, if you'll hang on and catch it in a moment, Sigmund Freud would have called the ego. It only threatened Christianity because once psychology became a separate art, then it took some of the power away from the priest. And there's no reason to feel powerless at all, at all. This is what Paul would call the flesh, these circumference issues, okay? And how we are in those circumference issues determines a lot of our behavior. Sometimes we get involved in things that are not good for our health, our mental health or our physical health because we are caught up in all of this. You see, we're caught up. People who they have everything you wish you had, so you don't understand why they're not happy. And they're just like you. They're trying to balance all of this and get caught up in the lies and the addictions that follow and the things that we do. And Paul talks a lot about those. Flesh is not evil. It is not evil. It is simply something to be died to. That's what Paul talks about. This is what it is that we are called to die to. And the power of resurrection in this life is found in the dying to these things right here. But these aren't the whole list. You see, I asked you and you stopped right there. There were a few things that I got to thinking about that go on this list that we didn't really want to talk about today. So let me put some of them on here. I am right. That's a circumference issue. That's one that we kill over. I'm right, which means somebody else is wrong, which means I need to really be right. I am right. It is a circumference issue. I am justified. I deserve this. Let me just put that on there. Not punishment. I deserve the reward. I deserve this next drink. I deserve this next encounter because I'm justified. If you lived my life, you would understand. And then there we go. There we go, right down that trail. Here's a good one. I earned it. Man, that's the American way. And I remember when my disciples' history lecturer and professor and the president of Bright Divinity School said out loud to the class one day, don't ever, ever, ever think that you earned whatever it is you have, even your degree when you leave this school. You were graced by God to be one of the few people who had an opportunity and a privilege to have this experience. We get in our car every day and drive off and say, I earned it. I deserve it. I'm justified in it. I'm right because I bought it. I paid for it. I made every last payment. I worked honestly to have it. And so we drive off in it, and we don't realize that most of the world never will. Never will. And it's just by grace that we were in that few people in this place in this period of time that had the opportunity to do that. Here's a good one. They owe me. They owe me. Boy, I tell you, is anybody under 20 years old today? Garrett is. I don't want to offend Garrett, but some of our kids are so entitled. Have y'all noticed that? And guess, relax, Garrett, we did it. It's not your fault. We did it. We did that, okay? We modeled it, and we gave it to them, and that's what we did. And now we get to live with it. Look at these things. They don't look evil, do they? I worked hard. I earned it. I'm an honest person. I'm right, by golly. I'm right. You know what these are? These are circumference issues, and they are here to be died to. When the Apostle Paul said, I'm going to take you back 3 weeks, in Romans 7, I can't do what it is I want to do. The very thing I want to do is what I can't do, and the very thing I don't want to do is what I do. He was not out of control. He was observing the law. He was devout. He was better than most people at being religious and at being close to God and at honoring his commitment to God. He was there, and I bet you he was there on time every time. It's not Paul saying, I can't seem to stop running around with loose women, getting drunk and hanging out. No. He's saying, even when I keep the law, my motives are misguided. Who, he says, can save me from this body of flesh? Who can save me from these issues right here that seek to control me? And he says that Christ Jesus, because he's got the answer in his pocket the whole time. This is you, hidden in Christ, here, in the center of your life. Now, before you leave today, I want everybody in this room to be saved. Are you with me? We're talking about salvation. For Paul, salvation is his thesis for Romans. And it is a free gift from God. And salvation is experienced in the next life, as we know from years of being Christians, that salvation in the next life is experienced as heaven. Are we okay with that? That we've been saved and that we believe that when we die that God has complete control of what happens to us next, and whatever it looks like and however we think of it or define it and however we read it as, streets of gold, gates of pearl, the great reunion in the sky, whatever it is, it's all of that and more, I'm quite sure, because I have the faith in God and my salvation that when I die I am taken care of. And everyone else I love is the same. Amen? Salvation after we die is experienced as heaven. But salvation is after death is not all that the Apostle Paul wants to talk about. He keeps talking about now, here. And salvation for Paul in this life is experienced as faith. When we live lives of faith, we begin to be transformed. He uses that word a lot, transformation. And not only we are transformed, but we begin to rub off. We begin to kind of emulate people. We put out this vibe, if you want to be kind of hippie about it. We start to transform the people around us and the community around us. And you know what? We say, well, yeah, if they follow us to church and if they believe, if they become like us, our way might get a little easier, because after all, that's what we really want, is for everybody to be like us, right? It makes my life a little simpler. But the truth is, that's not what we're talking about. A life of faith is how we experience the power of resurrection now. Paul talks about, I want the power of Jesus' resurrection, and I don't want to wait on it. He says, I want it now. And so the way we have it now is through faith, through belief, through pisteuo, through trusting and risking everything. Evidence of things that we cannot see. And that always comes back to dying to circumference issues. You know, somebody told me once, you can be right or you can be related. I told you I was in marriage counseling once, and the marriage counselor said, I would not like to be married with you. You don't lose arguments. It's not a good thing. Sometimes you can't be right and related, okay? I'm justified. I deserve it. I earned it. This happens not only to us as individuals, it happens to our whole culture. This infects our religious culture, you see. Now, the thing about dying to all of this is that it's dangerous. If the world does not understand you, the world will destroy you. You know that, or they'll seek to, but they can't because you're hidden here in Christ. Well, they can come after some of this. But Jesus has said himself, do not fear those who have power over this. Fear only God who has the ability to condemn this. And in Christ there is no condemnation. Are you with me? Come on. Come on. This is exciting. This can change the world. This is an experience that is experienced as life. As life. But here's the thing about life. Jesus said the road to life is narrow. Now, some people have interpreted that to say that the road to heaven is narrow and not very many people make it. But, you know, if you sit with that statement for 20 years, like I did, you start to think, then how does God win? If most people go to hell, then God created all of this just to wipe it out one day to create some little gated community or country club in heaven. And if that's what's going on, probably y'all like me aren't really interested in going. But dying to these things is what is difficult. It is giving away that false self, those ego issues, dying to the flesh and allowing resurrection to happen, because it only happens when something dies, okay? Follow me. The road to life is narrow. In other words, I'm going to go out on a limb here, okay? This is not a piece of criticism. I want you to hear. I want you to use this. Most of our religious communities, I could be wrong. It's your place to correct me, but I think most of them are caught up in the circumference issues. Some of the churches I grew up in and belonged to in my life were caught up in the circumference issues. And God bless them, because it's easy to do. We have board meetings here, and sometimes all we talk about in board meetings are the circumference issues. But we have a really keen staff of people here who, 2 or 3 contemplative prayer sessions, and you start to realize how thin this is. You see, Paul said this in the beginning of the reading today. We are not slaves to this. Now, he said it because we're living like it in his day and in ours. But he's trying to say you don't have to be. Break the bond to these things and be enslaved to the Spirit, which gives life. The road is narrow. It's only done through things like this. Break it all down. Give me what you want me to take home, preacher. What can I use out of this? Here it is. Compassion, forgiveness, love, restoration. Those are the things in that little red dot in the center. Those are the things that God did for me, and God did for you, and God does every single minute of every single day. You know, have you ever looked at how the world is so violent? That the universe and nature and things are like, if there weren't some force giving light, we'd live in darkness all the time. If there wasn't some force giving us life, we would suffocate and die in the next minute. If there wasn't some force being good and pouring goodness out on us, the evil in all this would overtake us. And sometimes we ask God, why don't you do away with evil and all that stuff? And I think we're misguided in asking the question, maybe God is exhausting God's self just pouring good out and keeping this universe from consuming us. Do you see? The road to life is narrow because compassion and forgiveness and mercy and restoration, they don't live in I am right, I am justified, I deserve it, I earned it, or doggone it, those scoundrels owe me this. Now here, this is controversial, but sometimes you look and say the church is caught up in circumference issues, so God cannot be found in. You know, when I grew up, we criticized the Catholic Church because they had become so material and so superficial and such idolaters, which Paul calls himself an idolater for keeping the law so well. But here's what I'm going to say. If Jesus is not Catholic, in case you didn't know this, Jesus is not even Christian. There wasn't any such thing when Jesus was around. Jesus was a Jew by birth and by nationality, and Jesus practiced a way of expressing his faith in God and his relationship to God through the Judaic practices. He was a Jew in a lot of senses. But if Catholics practice compassion and forgiveness and mercy, then Jesus, in that moment, is Catholic. Wow. When Baptist people forgive and restore and let go of I am right and I am justified, then Jesus is Baptist. Are y'all going to go here with me, or do I need to start the car before I say this? If Buddhists are compassionate and merciful, why can't Jesus be Buddhist? He's not Christian. I'm not saying we're Buddhist. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the road to life is narrow, and everybody that belongs to a church isn't necessarily on that path. Now be at ease, okay? Because salvation in the next life is taken care of with heaven. And I believe in God, and I have faith and trust in Jesus, and I think everybody that would tell me they're saved, I believe them. Don't you? I think God can be trusted with that. But I'm kind of like the Apostle Paul. I want to know what we can do about the ride getting there, because I think God is interested in this life here, in my life, in my world, in the world you and I live in. One last thing is Paul tells us to not be slaves to these things, but to the Spirit. Because I want you to know that when we are enslaved to these things, and we can live our entire lives caught up in the circumference issues, they leave us unsatisfied. They leave us wanting more, okay? They leave us wanting more. It's like you can have a drink of water or you can have the fountain. It's like you can have this next healing or you can have the healer. It's like you can know what it is to be loved or you can be love. You see, only the Spirit can sustain us in such a way. I think there's 1,000 people in Abilene just by the averages and the statistics. I believe there are 1,000 people in Abilene who want to get on that narrow path to life and walk it. But the problem is, and again, this is not a criticism, but the problem is, where do you go? You know, really, probably the community of faith in not just Abilene, but in our entire culture, this is what Richard Rohr and Philip Yancey would probably say. The community of faith that most reflects that is the recovery community. One of the reasons is because they've limited circumference issues. They don't own property. They don't establish themselves in the ways that churches do and that families do. But here is an opportunity, a place where people can talk openly about Jesus without being stuck in metaphors, and a place where we can challenge ourselves to walk the narrow road of compassion and forgiveness. And faith can become larger and larger when we're led out there into that place where there are no borders. But only there. Only there. So you have to be willing. You have to be willing and brave. God bless us today. I'm sorry this was such a lecturing and a teaching kind of message today. No funny stories, but I told you we're going to spend 3 weeks in Romans 8, and next week is going to be the climax, and so we're building up to that. So come next week and bring all of your circumference issues with you. Whatever you do, leave saved, okay? Pray with me now.